So today I'm going to share a message with you. Usually what I do at anniversaries, I do a little bit of recap using biblical examples to narrate our story. And today we are going to look at the story of Abraham and also see our journey as a church. In Genesis chapter 22, we witness Abraham receiving one of the greatest covenant blessings in Scripture, a lifelong and generational blessing that will extend to all nations of the earth. Yet this blessing didn't come in a single moment. It was the culmination of a lifelong journey with God. Over many years, God shaped Abraham through obedience, through seasons of waiting, through tests of faith, through divine correction, and an ever-deepening covenant relationship. Before Abraham experienced God as Jehovah Jireh, he first had to learn to trust him completely. His journey teaches us that the greatest revelations of God are the richest blessings and the most enduring legacy are often forged through a life of faithful obedience, unwavering faith, and total surrender. Don't expect things to happen overnight when you come to the Lord. It's going to be a long walk. It's going to be a journey. And at every stage of the journey, the blessing is appropriate for that stage of journey. Just as Abraham's journey culminated in covenant blessings, our 31-year journey bears witness to God's grace, His glory, and His provision, positioning PMI for an even greater future. And today we're going to look at lessons from Abraham's journey. The first thing we note is the call to live. The call to live. God had called Abraham out of his country to go into a place that He will show him. Every journey of faith begins with a call to obedience. God commanded Abraham to leave his country, his family, and everything familiar to a land that God revealed in His own time. Faith will always begin with a very radical obedience. You don't know how it's going to end, but you start by obedience to God. We do not have to know everything before we obey God. We do not have to know the end before we obey God. We start obedience in faith. We simply need to trust God and His voice. God often calls us to leave the security of the familiar and our comfort zone before He reveals the fullness of His purpose. So we learn from Abraham. He didn't know how the journey was going to be. He didn't know where he was going, but he obeyed God's voice. Today, I pray that as you sit in this place and listen to me, you will hear God's voice and you will obey. The second thing about Abraham is that he journeyed without a map. There was no detailed roadmap. All he had was God's promise and His word. There was no map to follow, but Abraham responded by trusting God enough to obey even when he could not see the destination or understand the journey. You don't know where God is taking you. When we started, we don't know that 31 years will be here. We started in some classroom, on some park somewhere, but every stage of the journey, God has been with us. Welcome to the days of hustle. Abraham's call took him into hustling, where he lived as a pilgrim in tents. He didn't have his own house. He owned almost nothing except God's promise. All he had was a promise of God. And for years, Abraham wandered through deserts. Abraham wandered through Canaan, believing in an inheritance that he had not yet received. By faith, you learn to trust God's promises while living in temporal circumstances. So I know when God started, He gave you a major promise, and you thought it was going to happen in 1 year, 2 years. But on the journey, now you find yourself wandering in the wilderness, sleeping in places you never thought. That is part of the journey. You don't give up, because God's promise does not take 1 month or 1 year. It's a lifetime. So we've been here for 31 years. We haven't seen what we wanted to see, but we started with a promise. We don't know the roadmap, but we are still pursuing God stage by stage. The third lesson is a season of farming. Soon after entering the promised land, Abraham entered into a season of farming. The land that God had given to him as a promise now became a place of testing. Abraham's faith was almost challenged immediately. Now you've entered into the land. The first thing that you meet in the land is hunger and famine, not the blessing that you thought you were going to get. So God's calling does not exempt us from difficult seasons. And that is why when you see people going through difficult seasons, be spiritual. Because God's calling will take you through difficult seasons. In the land of promise, you are going to encounter famine, but you still continue serving God faithfully. The fourth is what I call personal failures and God's mercy. Abraham was not a perfect man. Out of fear, he misrepresented Sarah as his sister. He tried to protect himself instead of trusting God. Yet God remained faithful to his covenant. God showed him that beyond your human inadequacies and shortcomings and your mistake, you can still pursue me. So even though Abraham made mistakes, he still served God. What this teaches us is that God's purposes are sustained by his grace, not by your human perfection. There'll be people, you will make mistakes, grievous mistakes. Don't let it take you out of the church. Still continue serving God. The world may reject you, but keep pursuing after the God who called you. God accepts you with your human imperfection. The next lesson is a lesson on betrayal and separation. I'm sure in following Abraham's story, you've realized that at a certain point, somebody he loved, called Lot, chose what appeared to be the better land, and Abraham had to part ways with somebody he loved. Sometimes people who start the journey with you may not end with you. Not everybody who starts with you will end the journey with you. Abraham still trusted God in spite of the pain that Lot had caused him. And so as you go through pain, because you've been through a painful experience, still hold on to Jehovah. And it was only after Lot had departed that God renewed his promise to Abraham. Sometimes obedience will lead to painful separation, but you've got to learn to deal with it. Sometimes people you thought they would never leave you may leave you, but God in all these things will still deepen his revelation and his covenant with you. So Abraham went through betrayals, people separated from him, and yet he still continued serving God. The sixth lesson is a lesson of battles and spiritual warfare. On Abraham's journey, he was engaged in many battles. He fought to rescue Lot, who had deserted him. He had to confront kings. He had to confront conflict and danger. And after his victory, he refused the riches of the king of Sodom, choosing God's blessings over worldly gain. So when you are following God by faith, you will fight battles. And you must learn to reject worldly compromise and value God's reward above earthly riches. Some people will try to compromise you and offer you things to cut short your journey. But remember, hold on to God's word. Like Abraham, God's covenant with us has never wavered, and our obedience must never cease. Through every battle, through every giant you face, every storm you go through, God remains faithful, enabling us to fight the good fight of faith and keep the faith. The seventh lesson is waiting for the promise. In Romans chapter 4, verse 8, the Bible tells us about hope against hope. Abraham believed. Against all hope, Abraham believed. Remember in Genesis chapter 15, God had told Abraham to count the stars and told him that so shall your seed be. Yet, Abraham is going through a period where for how many years he still hasn't received the promise that God made to him. Sometimes you've been in church, God gave you a promise and told you that you are going to be great. It looks like 20 years, 15 years. You are wondering, when is God going to speak? And at a certain point, you feel like giving up. You even had an encounter where God showed you the stars and you counted it. And it seems as if the more you count it and the more you persevere and you are serving, some way, somehow, still, the promise of God has not come to pass. You are still looking for that child. You are still looking for that breakthrough. You are still looking for that promise. And it seems to be delaying. Learn how to wait on God. Abraham believed when logic failed. Abraham believed through barren seasons and contrary circumstances. Years passed by. Still no son. Still no heir. Still no visible fulfillment. Abraham learned how to wait through disappointment, through unanswered questions, and through advancing age. And I know that as people grow older, you are wondering, what is wrong with my life? When am I also going to be? What is happening? And you are asking a lot of questions. But remember Abraham. He believed even when it was against hope. He believed through barren seasons. He believed when people were mocking and laughing at him. Years had passed by. He still didn't have the promise. When it looked impossible, when PMI had nothing, little, when resources were dry, when voices mocked and misunderstood like Abraham, we still stood firm on the promises of God. Today we are seeing fruits of lives transformed, destinies restored, nations reached. You've got to understand that waiting is often God's classroom for developing your faith. Learn how to wait. Don't give up. Don't be in a hurry. Keep waiting for what God has said he will do. The next lesson is what I call the Hagar episode. The Hagar episode. As the years passed by, Abraham grew weary of waiting and sought to fulfill God's promise through human reasoning rather than divine timing. So the birth of Ishmael was the result of impatience and self-effort, not God's appointed plan. And it produced consequences that will endure for generations. Yet, even in Abraham's failure, God's covenant faithfulness did not fail. You know, sometimes you make mistakes and you wonder, will God even still accept me? You can see from Abraham, the father of our faith, he made a grievous mistake that was going to last for that. The consequences of which were going to affect generations. Yet, God's covenant faithfulness did not fail. God corrected him. God renewed his promise and graciously continued his redemptive purpose, proving that while human impatience can complicate God's work, it cannot cancel God's covenant. One of the things I've learned to do is to see people who have made grievous mistakes and still know that God is with them. You see, what you go through does not determine God's presence with you. Remember, Joseph was in jail, yet God was there with him. So you may be going through a situation where everybody thinks God has left you, but God's covenant faithfulness does not fail. One of the things you should learn is that God's covenant is stronger than our failures. Abraham's mistake did not nullify God's promise. God corrected him, God reaffirmed his covenant, and fulfilled his word through Isaac. We've got to learn how to trust in God's grace and his faithfulness. So no matter, don't think that it's just been an easy journey. We've been through things where sometimes we wondered. But you see, we've had to trust in God's abiding faithfulness, his word. Even when you are rejected, even when people laugh at you, remember that God's covenant is stronger than your failures. The next lesson we learn is the covenant that was renewed in Genesis chapter 17. As Abraham continued serving God, remember the promise that started in Genesis chapter 12. And Abraham had journeyed along, but some way, somehow, in Genesis chapter 17, God renews his covenant with Abraham, changing his name to Abraham. I mean, I can imagine if Abraham had stopped because he was tired or because he didn't trust God again. His name will never have become Abraham. We'll still have known him as Abram. I believe that as you continue serving God, there'll be a change of name and identity. Abram's name will be changed to Abraham. Sarai's name will be changed to Sarah as signs of their new identity and divine calling. You started in a place where people were mocking you, but as you continue serving God, there is a progression and the change. God established circumcision as the sign of his covenant, reaffirming that his promises will be fulfilled according to his faithfulness and not human ability. So before God enlarges our assignment, he deepens our covenant with him. So I know you started with a call, started obeying God's voice, but there comes another deepening of your experience with God where God establishes a covenant and gives you a sign. God deepens our covenant with him. He prepares us inwardly before he expands us outwardly, reminding us that his promises are secured by his faithfulness, not our strength. 10th lesson is interceding for others. Very important lesson. As Abraham's walk with God matured, he moved from now seeking God's promises for himself. So remember, even as at this point, Abraham has still not received a child. And I'm sure he could have been so myopic and self-centered that he didn't bother about another person. But look at what is going to happen. He moves beyond seeking God's promises for himself and began partnering with God's heart. He now stands before God and is boldly interceding for Sodom, pleading for God's mercy on behalf of others. His faith was no longer just about receiving things for himself, but carrying God's burden for other people, for the lost sinners. So again, don't be so preoccupied with what you must get that you never serve God and you are not interested in other people and what they are going through. And this is a major lesson from Abraham. As a church, we have not received everything we want to receive, but we must still focus on helping other people, focusing on the youth, reaching out to people who are less privileged, helping them. Why? Because faith is not just about ourselves. A higher level of faith is letting God become revealed to other people. Mature faith looks beyond personal needs. It is not only believing God's promises for ourselves, but also the ability to stand in the gap, interceding for others, and advancing God's redemptive purposes. So when we come for prayer meeting, for example, we are not praying for ourselves even though we have needs. We also have needs, but we've grown beyond just us into seeing God's redemptive purposes for the world. We go on outreach, we do Bible studies, we visit people. Why? Because it's not just about, I need a child, I need a husband, I need a job. It is also about God's redemptive purpose. And as you mature in faith, your faith goes beyond your personal needs. So you can see the trajectory of Abraham's journey. A lot is changing in his life. It's not just about him. He's partnering God for other people, advancing God's redemptive purposes. Then we get to one of the major things about Abraham, the birth of Isaac in Genesis chapter 21. After 25 years of waiting, through seasons of uncertainty, battles, painful lessons, mistakes born of impatience, God is now going to fulfill his promise. So when you talk about Abraham, you are not talking about a smooth journey. You are not talking about a perfect person. You are talking about somebody who has gone through seasons of uncertainty. He's fought battles. He's had painful lessons. Some people have rejected him. People have left him. He's made mistakes personally. But still, God's covenant blessing is about to be fulfilled. The promised Isaac is now being born. Sorrow is going to give way to joy. Waiting turned to fulfillment, and what seemed impossible is now becoming a reality. What is the lesson? God's delays are never God's denials. Let's all say it together. God's delays are never God's denials. Say it again. God's delays are never God's denials. He's always on time, and his promises are fulfilled according to his perfect plan and timing. So at the right time, in the fullness of time, God enters into Abraham's life, and the promise he had made in Genesis chapter 12 is about to be fulfilled. But it's been seasons of waiting, seasons of uncertainty, seasons of trials, seasons of testing. Abraham has not left God. He's still serving God in spite of his imperfections. Sometimes I see people who have given up. They are tired. You don't realize that faith is a journey. And I'll end by telling you the story of PMI. 31 years. It's been a journey. It's been a journey of trials, of testings, of sometimes wanting to give up. People leave, some others come. But at the end of it all, we still hold on to God and his word. It is not about the people. It is about God and who he is in our lives. So what did Abraham endure? Before reaching Mount Moriah, Abraham endured a few things. Number one, he had to leave everything that was familiar. He had to leave his father, his mother, his friends. He had to cut off from everybody. So the first thing Abraham did was that he left everything familiar. Number two, he was living as a pilgrim. At a certain point, he didn't have a place to lay his head. He was sleeping in tents. Number three, he went through famine and uncertainty. There was hunger. Things were not the way he wanted it, but he still continued serving God. Number four, he went through personal failures and restoration. Abraham messed up. He went to have a child he shouldn't have had, but he still continued. Number five, he went through painful separations. Wow. Somebody close to him, whom he had helped, left him. He went through spiritual battles, fighting. He went through long seasons of waiting. He went through delayed promises. And he went through personal mistakes. Then he went through repeated tests of faith. And then finally, he had to go through the challenge of surrendering what he loved most. But you see, every season that Abraham went through was actually preparing him for the next season. Is somebody hearing me today? I know that some of us are going through a journey. Sometimes it seems as if people are laughing at you because they have overtaken you. But you see, Isaac will come. You will laugh. The meaning of Isaac is laughter. And the time comes when we begin to laugh. They've reproached, they've mocked you. They thought you will never amount to anything. They thought as for you, you are useless. You will never marry. You will never have a child. You will never get a job. You will never become rich. And you yourself, sometimes the seasons you've gone through, 25 years, you've been trying to serve God. 31 years we've been in this place. You think we have everything I want? You think every dream has been fulfilled? No. But we still continue. We still pursue. I mean, if we leave God, what else shall we do? Where are we going? So look at the disciples. Jesus asked them, will you also go away? He says, to whom shall we go? So we may not have the child we want. We may not have the car we want. We may not be in the place we want. But like Abraham, faith is a journey. And every season prepares us for the next season. I've asked myself a few questions. Why didn't God just give Abraham Isaac after 1 year? Why did he have to wait for 25 years? Because Abraham has to come to a point where now he knows that this is God. It's beyond human effort and abilities. And some of the things we are going through, it is to purify our hearts. Some of the things we are going through is to make us more focused on serving God. It's to make us go beyond our personal needs and partner with God. Because you are too much about yourself. And every time we give, it is not because we have extra money. Every time we come to church, it's not because we have extra time. It's because we have to learn to partner with God. And in the midst of that, we still don't have the child of promise. In the midst of that, we are still not married. In the midst of that, we still haven't bought that thing. But look at Abraham, the father of faith, modeling after us the journey of faith. And so finally, we come to what I want to speak about today, the ultimate test. In Genesis chapter 12, 22, verses 12 to 18. And we are all going to read that. Genesis chapter 22, verses 12 through to 18. And he said, lay not thy hand upon the lad. I think all of us should read this together. 1, 2, go. And he said, lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thy only son from me. Come on, everybody, read it. Read it like it's an anniversary service. 1, 2, go. Verse 12. And he said, lay not thine hand upon him, neither do thou anything unto him. Why? For now I know that thou fearest God. So all along from Genesis, you find out that God was proving Abraham, do I know you? Are you really what you say? Are you really who you are? God says, now I know you. Now I know you that you fear God. Seeing you have not withheld thy son, thy only son from me. It means that as we go through the journey of life, we'll be tested. Our motives will be purified. Will you continue serving God beyond your needs? Would you still be a prayer warrior if your own prayer warrior needs are not met? Would you still be a singer if what you're singing does not even minister to you? Would you lose hope just because you haven't received something God told you? Would you stop the church just because you haven't seen the kind of breakthrough you want to see? Would you still be a prayer warrior in spite of the fact that you haven't received your child? And the interesting thing is, what is not revealed here is how the world sees Abraham. And maybe one of the days I'll preach about it. I'm sure Abraham had left his father, his mother, his brothers, his sisters, his country, their idols. And sometimes all those idol worshippers have a child. All those idol worshippers have bought cars. And you are wondering, for how many years am I going to serve God with a promise and I don't see it? And sometimes it is easy to say, let me go back. But God says, I'm proving you to see. how long you will stay, whether you mean what you are saying. And for 25 years, the crowd was laughing at him. They were mocking him. Yet Abraham continued serving God. Till God said, now I know. Now I know you fear God. Now I know that you will not withhold thy son, thy only son from me. Now I know your heart. Now I know what you say about giving. Now I know that you really enjoy my work. Now I know that your covenant with me is settled. You also mean to me what I mean to you. Now I know that we're on the same path. Now I know that you want to marry me as much as I want to marry you. Now I know that you are prepared to be committed to me as much as I'm committed to you. Now I know you fear God and you will not withhold thy son, thy only son from me. So look at verse 13. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. 14. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh. The name of that place. Everybody say the place. Come on, say there's a place. And look at what it said. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord, it shall be seen. There's a place when you get to, you will see. There's a place you must get to, you will see. It's a journey. You started from your father's house, but God is taking you through various steps, through pilgrimages, through deserts, and he's now bringing you to a place, and he says, in that place, you will see something. You see, not everybody has seen God in his full measure. God reveals himself progressively through to us on the journey. But there's a place it is worth getting to, because there you will see, in the mount of the Lord, it shall be seen. And look at verse 15. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of the heaven the second time and said, by myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son. Wow. That in blessing, 17, I will bless thee. In multiplying, I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heavens, and as the sun which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gates of his enemies. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. You know, when we were younger, we were told to claim promises. And we used to say, Abraham's blessings are mine. But now I know that Abraham's blessings were as a result of a journey. You see, you can't stay in JHS, for example, and claim postgraduate salary. You have to go there. You can't be a child and want things that belong to adults. You have to grow up. And it's a journey. And depending on how well you apply yourself to the journey, you will get there. Some people get to the journey faster because they are determined to get there. Others stop. Others virtually return because the journey is too arduous. So the question you should ask is, where on the journey of faith are you? 31 years. Where are we in our journey? Are we tired? Have we stopped? Because of that, we don't pray. Because of that, we don't come to fellowship meetings. Because of that, we don't give again. But look at Abraham. At a certain point, you've gotten tired. I will no longer give my offering. I will no longer give my tithe. I will no longer come to church. I'm too big for a department meeting. And you stop. But Abraham's journey, at every stage, you find the pillars underlining his journey. It was a covenant walk with God. He was there. He had proven himself. And so God said, after 25 years, I've given you the child. But I'm going to put you to another test. So Abraham's walk with God before Genesis chapter 22 was not a single act of faith, but a lifelong pilgrimage of obedience, of waiting, of testing, of failure, of restoration, and increasing trusts. By the time God asked Abraham to offer Isaac, Abraham had already spent decades learning to trust God's character. And so, before we even understand this and the mountain, you've got to understand that this is the combination of a faith that has been refined over many years. This is not just a singular act. This is the faith that has been tested and tried. This is the faith that has proven to be there. I am excited when I see people like Efiba, Pastor David, people who have started with us for long, and we've been through. Listen, The work of, there's been testings. There have been times we felt like leaving. There have been times we felt like giving up. There have been times we felt like going back. But through it all, when you study the story of Abraham, you begin to understand this is faith that is being refined over the years. Only after decades of working with God. Now God was going to test Abraham. And God asked Abraham to offer Isaac. Somebody has waited for 25 years. The question was no longer at this stage, can God give us a son? The question that had to be answered was, can Abraham trust God enough to surrender the son back to him? Can God ask you for what he has blessed you with? After you have waited 25 years, you've waited for all this while. Because sometimes when we've waited for long and we have what God has promised, the next stage is we are reluctant to continue serving God. After I've waited for all this time and gotten this job, now you want me to leave the job and come to church and come and still pray and go for fellowship meetings. But God said, I give you the blessing. Can you give it back to me? After you've waited long and you've gotten that job that is now giving you an income, can God ask you, can you give your offering? Can you honor me? And you find at that stage, many people get stuck. They receive the promise. Misako. Yet there's another stage. If you cross over, you will enter into a permanent blessing. So at Mount Moriah, Abraham is going to discover something. That a surrendering of our lives, a complete obedience, leads to another level of intimacy with God. It was there in the mount that he encountered Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. So many of us may have gotten to the point you received your Isaac, but there's another level. Isaac is not the ultimate. There's another level of obedience. I believe that as a church, we have come far. And I can trace to you where we are at this stage of the journey. But there's another stage that many people need to say we will cross over. Will you give back to God that which he gave back to you? Can you give God back your life? He gave you your life. Can you give God back your job? He gave you your job. Can you give back God what he gave, that precious thing he gave to you? Or you are going to hold on to that and never give again? Can you give to God that which is most valuable to you? And it's at that stage that many people get stuck. They never get to the mount where it shall be seen. And every time they get something from God, it becomes their last stop. So there are people who are earning money, unlike David. David said, of thine own have I given back to thee. He says, what am I and what are we, what are these people that we are able to give like this? And David crossed over. You see, there's a crossing over we must cross over. Every great move of God begins with a journey. The story of Abraham is not merely the story of one man's obedience. It is the story of a God who progressively reveals himself to people who trust him completely. Abraham's journey began in Genesis chapter 12, when God called him to leave the familiar and walk into the unknown. It ends up in Mount Moriah in Genesis chapter 22, where through obedience, through faith, through surrender, through sacrificial worship, God is now going to reveal himself as Jehovah Jireh, the God who provides. The journey to Moriah was never simply about Isaac. It was about Abraham's heart. What is in your heart? Because before God blesses you beyond a certain point, your heart must be revealed. God is asking one question. Do you trust me more than my gifts to you? Because many people come to church. I want a husband. I want a wife. In the name of Jesus, I want that breakthrough. I want that thing. God is saying that, do you trust me more than my gifts? Abraham answered everything by placing what was most valuable to him back on the altar. So Abraham's journey teaches us that faith is tested in every season, both in barrenness and in blessing. When you don't have, you'll be tested. When you also have, you'll be tested. Some people don't give because, I don't have. Some people also don't give because I have, but it's too precious. I can't give it to God. Where do you find yourself today? I don't have or I can't give. You've got to answer that question. And during the years of waiting, Abraham had to trust God when nothing seemed to be happening. But his greatest test came after the promise had been fulfilled. And it's important as a church because today we are getting more numbers, we are getting more money, we are getting more land. Is our faith going to shift from God into what we have? Or in spite of what we have, our faith is still in God? Now that you have a husband, you no longer pray. Now that you have a child, you no longer pray. Now that you have a job, you no longer pray. Is your faith in what God has given to you, or in spite of all the blessing, your faith is still in God? As a church, we have to negotiate this. As a church, we have to make a decision that in spite of the blessings of cars and houses and numbers, our faith is still in God. Our prayer meetings are still important. Our Bible studies are still important. Our fellowship with God is still important. Our giving to God is still important. Because many people, when they are blessed, they can't negotiate that. When Isaac was born, God asked Abraham to surrender the very blessing he had given him. So faith must remain steadfast in every season. We learn to trust God in times of lack. We learn to trust God and remain surrendered in times of abundance. The greatest test is not whether we can wait for God's blessings, but whether we can still put God first after we have received blessings. In Genesis chapter 22, God says, take your son and offer him as a sacrifice. After receiving the promise, God is still asking, am I still first in your life? Are you ready to lay it all down again? At 31 years, PMI stands in blessing. There are many more people. There are spiritual sons and daughters. Territories have been gained. There's fruit that is evident. But God must still remain our priority. The blessings of God must never replace the blesser, who is God. Will you say yes, fully, radically, and obediently? Like Abraham, we will say yes. We will not withhold anything from God. This is one of the most profound and defining moments in Abraham's life. Every promise God made to Abraham was bound up in Isaac. That job that you have, that breakthrough that you have, it seems as if, Charlie, your future is determined by that thing. And then God comes and says, I want to see whether that thing is more important than me now. And every one of us, we get into the journey where we'll have to ask. Sometimes people have asked me, how was it like leaving the American embassy? Because people have been struggling to get a visa. And so there are people, if they get an American visa or they travel, they will never come back. There are people, if they get a job, that'll be the last. The job may destroy them. The blessing, they can't handle it. There are some people who marry, they get a girlfriend, boyfriend, and it seems to be the end. They can't come back and serve God with what they have been blessed with. That is why people struggle with giving. Even at an anniversary service, even with their first fruits, they struggle because, no, we enjoy the blessing and the cars and the houses and the dollars and no, we can't give it back to you. But there's a test you must pass and you must cross over. God asked Abraham to surrender the very gifts through which the promise was to be fulfilled. This was not just a mere test of Abraham's willingness. It was a test of whether Abraham trusted God more than the promise. Do you trust God more than Isaac? Can you trust the God who gave you Isaac more than the Isaac you have received? And we learn a very important lesson. God's provision is usually discovered at the place of complete surrender. And that is why today I'm preaching, in the mount of the Lord, it shall be seen. In the mountain of that, there's a place you must get to. You will see, you will hear, you will enter into a blessing that can never be revoked. So because Abraham obeyed without withholding, God responded with an irrevocable covenant oath. He says, by myself have I sworn. Now, if God has to swear, then you can see that this one is serious. God doesn't have to. But God gets to a place where he's saying that, ditto, because of what you have done, by myself have I sworn. Look at the blessing. The blessings that flowed in verse 18 of Genesis chapter 22, were fourfold. There was the personal blessing. He says, give me verse 17. Is it 17 or 18? Okay. That in blessing I will bless thee. Let's go to 16, sorry. Let's start from 16, please. I just want to emphasize. Let's read it together. One to go. By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing. Everybody say this thing. Say it again. You see, every one of us must pray and ask God to show you this thing that will take you over. This thing that will make you cross over and never return into poverty. This thing that will make you cross over and never go back. Because there's a blessing that can never be taken by any circumstance. Famine, battles, nothing. Now you've crossed over. May God show us what we must do. He says, because thou hast done this thing and hast not withheld thy son, thy only son. 17. He says, in blessing, I will bless thee. In multiplying, I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the earth, and as the sun upon which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gates of his enemies. Look at verse 18. Verse 18. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Why? Because thou hast obeyed my voice. You see, may God speak to you. May God show you the thing that if you do, you will never go back. You become unstoppable. Many times I've stood here and you have heard me say, we will never be broke. That nobody can stop us as a church. It's not just morpho. You see, because there's a thing. There's a voice. When you obey. There's a thing if you do. And it's the place of complete, total surrender. And all of us must get there. So you find out that there are fourfold blessings. Number one, there's the personal blessing. Number two, there's extraordinary multiplication. He said, your descendants will become numerous. Number three, there's victory over opposition. And number four, there's global impact. You see, because thou hast obeyed my voice, obedience did not end God's love. It positioned Abraham to experience the fullness of God's covenant purposes. So already Abraham was serving God. So his obedience at that point was not going to make God love him more, but was now going to place him in a position that God's covenant blessing is going to come upon him. Sometimes you get to a stage in your Christian life, oh, now I pray, now I go to church, I also give my time. But you see, your covenant with God has not been deepened. And at a certain point, you feel bored because as if everything is mundane, the same thing. And you don't know how to move to the next level. But the next level is the place of complete surrender. It's not just service. I know you come to church, I know you join an usher, I know you clap your hands, but the next level is the level of, can God own me? Fully. I'm like a burnt offering. I taught you last week. I'm not just an offering I'm a burnt offering. I offer myself, my body as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. I know that many of you've been praying, but listen, not every prayer is what we do on a Friday. There's a prayer of a covenant sacrifice where you lay an offering, your life. It's not easy to leave your job. It's not easy to leave your father and your mother. It's not easy to decide that, Charlie, I'm sold out for God. But Abraham had gotten to the point. He says, God said, because you obeyed my voice, you didn't withhold anything. His journey demonstrates that faith is not merely about believing God's promises. It is trusting him enough to obey even when your obedience is costly. PMI, we've walked a similar journey. God called us before revealing everything. 31 years ago, we were in some canteen somewhere. I didn't know what it was going to be like. I had no idea that 31 years I'll be here and I'll be the kind of pastor that I am. We've endured seasons of sacrifice. We've endured waiting. We've endured testing, opposition, miraculous provision. And yet through every stage, God has sustained us. His glory has been revealed. His provision has been upon us. And like Abraham, our testimony is not simply what we have built. It is the God who has faithfully walked with us every step of the journey. We've gone through battles, disappointments, and moments when the future seemed uncertain. But we have found out also that God's greatest revelations are found on the mountain of obedience. Where you lay down your life, you will see. And so today, I urge you into the next stage of your life. I don't know where you may find yourself now, but I tell you, move to the next level. Don't stay stuck. And don't give up the foundations of your faith just because you are going through a period of waiting or you are going through a battle. Hold on, because God will reveal himself as Jehovah Jireh. May we never lose what has brought us here. May we always obey when God speaks. May we continue to believe when circumstances seem impossible. May we continue to surrender everything to him. May we continue to sacrifice, worship sacrificially, trusting that the God who calls is the God who provides. Because there's a place where God reveals himself as Jehovah Jireh, the God who's more than enough. For 31 years, this has been the testimony of PMI. And with unwavering confidence, we declare that we will continue with greater grace, greater glory, greater provision, greater harvest. Because the God who began a good work in us will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. To every faithful member, partner, and leader, today I say thank you, and I wish all of you happy anniversary. Put your hands together for the Lord.